So Pranay, talk us through your backstory of starting SigNoz, right? How did you arrive at the problem statement? How did the team come together? What were those really early days like?
Yeah, so we sort of got to this domain of observability. So to the beginners who sort of don't understand this domain, I'll just give you a quick overview so that they have context when I talk about it. So observability is the domain where you monitor applications and services which you run on cloud, right? For example, if you're Myntra, you're running something in your servers, and then you want to understand how is it performing. Say, if you open a page, is it loading fast, slow? Uh, how does it, and if it's slow, how can you sort of increase the speed, right? So as a product, we help people understand that hey, what if something is wrong? How wide is wrong? How can you fix this? So that's like the broad domain of observability. We got introduced to this domain. So I didn't know about the domain till 4 years back. So as the word observability, I didn't know about it. I got to know about this problem when I was doing like I was reading product at a startup in India, and that's where we saw this problem that hey, so we're a mobile app company. Like our product was a mobile app, and whenever something used to break, we would start getting calls from customer care that hey boss, this is breaking, and like say customers are making payments and they're not getting activated and things like that, and can you look into it, right? And when this problem happens, it's a very hair in fire problem that hey, like something is breaking, customer care is on my head. And because we didn't have tools, good observability tools like SigNoz, I would basically have to get like 8 of my top engineers in a room and try to ask that hey, like what's going wrong. You would look into this path, you look into this path, you look into this path, and try to come up with a solution, right? And this is not easy, especially when things are under fire and customers are giving you bad ratings in Google. So that's where I got introduced to this problem that hey, there's something called observability. And then I was discussing with my co-founder Ankit. So he was VP at another startup, and he was also facing similar problems that hey, when things break, it's very difficult to figure out what's going wrong, right? So that's where it started that hey, like this is a problem which seems interesting, seems very critical to companies, and so we sort of started digging deeper. And as we sort of got deeper, we found that it's a big market. So there are like public companies which are like $20 billion plus valuations in this market. So it's a huge market. Interestingly, there's no big Indian company in this space as of now, which sort of was very interesting because India is the third largest number of country with the third largest number of developers if you think US and China. And sort of that's where it clicked our interest that hey, it's like such a big domain, and seems like a product which developers would need. It's essential for the product. It's not uh, like good to have. It's like must have, right? So can you do something around it? So that's where we started. We started digging deeper into it, and then we found that hey, like there are good proprietary solutions which are there in this space, like Datadog, Neuralink, and there are open source solutions, but they're not as great as what Datadog and Neuralink do, right? And as developer ourselves, we always thought that hey, can we like our first instinct to start with open source tools, right? Because you have a community around it, you can ask questions, learn more about it, play with the code. So we thought that hey, like can we build something which is as great as the proprietary tools, but in open source, so that like sort of everybody can adopt it and play with it.
And then in the initial days, one of the big things that kind of I see, at least as a US India kind of venture investor, is that DevTools is always very crowded, right? You pick up any use case, there are always tons of tools out there. What was that gap, right, very sharply, that you saw, or maybe you kind of saw an overall opportunity but you eventually arrived at? And then kind of following on to that, did you always know that hey, the US is going to be your market, or did you say that look, let's start with India, or kind of let's just put it out there in the open source community, let's see where it is sticking?
Yeah, so I think, and I'll go slightly deeper into the product to
Yeah.
explain like
Yeah.
what was the gap in the market we saw.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, right, there were existing products in open source, and
Yeah.
then there are proprietary solutions which were considered like best of the breed. So in observability, there are like multiple signals through which you can monitor applications. So It is metrics, traces, and logs, just to like name the three. And one gap which we saw was that these proprietary solutions, what they do well is that they combine these three signals in a single application and correlate across them. So you can go from say, hey, like my logs are showing these errors. Can I show which are the machines where these logs are coming from, which are the services these logs are coming from, and then be able to solve this problem much faster, right? While the open source tools, which like the prominent tool was Grafana at that point, they had taken the approach that this will be different signals will have different applications. So you'll have something for logs, you'll have something for metrics, you'll have something for traces, and the way to link across them was not as easy. So that was sort of the first thing which we found, that hey, there's no good tool in open source which ties this together. And if you think about it, linking is critical because it helps you solve issues faster. Like at the end of the day, like these tools solve two type of problems. Helps you prevent such problems, like helps you prevent some outages, or second is if things are not working well, how can you fix it fast, right? And when you can't correlate, you can't really get to the like nitty-gritties of the issue, that why is something happening very quickly, right? So that's where the like sort of the gap we found in the market. And we initially tested it with some Indian customers. So to sort of get to the second part of the question, we didn't know that it will be focused on US. We are just trying to understand that here, is it like a gap which is big enough? And like, are people facing this problem, right? And if you think about it, developers in India are like quite mature, like quite advanced now, almost as close as US, but India like follows US quite closely.
Yeah.
Like we are sort of a lot of founders moving from each other, developers going from year to year, right? So we didn't know at first that hey, like it's a US based product, but we knew that hey, like if developers want it, developers are type of persona where if one set of developers have a problem, every developers have a problem. It's not very geo specific because developers collaborate very fast. Everybody's on Slack with each other, their GitHub community, etc. So developer world, the good products get spread very quickly. Developers will tell each other, and that's where we try to focus that hey, like, is there a gap in the market? Are developers finding it useful? And US was sort of not like the first thing which came to our mind.
No, that's super interesting, and I think one of the key discussion points that I have with a lot of like very early day zero dev tool founders, right, is okay, you're starting up in India. Now, of course, eventually you know that the most kind of monetizable market is the US. I mean, that's kind of the holy grail, right? But what are those steps? And in DevTools, it's a great point, right? Uh, and unlike enterprise customers, the classic India B2B versus US B2B story, in India, you actually have a fair amount of volume as well for developers. I mean, it's a massive user base that you can get into, at least get the initial versions out.
Yeah, definitely. I think like if you think about it, India has like one of the top developers. Like if you think like just if you want to stack rank, US has one of the best developers. Like we work with developers across the world, right? So we sort of have a good sense of like where China developers are good, though like we don't interact with them because of the language issues. Israel developers are good. And then I would say third or fourth would be Indian developers.
Yeah, no, this is interesting because, the classic advice that's given in any kind of SaaS or enterprise software company that is kind of starting from India and trying to go to the US is, you need to be in the US on day zero, which I think overall kind of applies to most contexts. In DevTools, I think there is a shot in terms of at least getting your first, MVP, MUP, whatever you call it, like the early versions of the product out, get it tested, get some traction so that you actually, when you come here, you can actually kind of utilize, whatever time you have in the US.
Yeah, I would still say US is, as you said, like has the most monetizable market because just from a like PPP perspective, right?
Yeah.
India is still at like $8,000 PPP, while US is $70,000 to $80,000.
Yeah.
So people are much more willing to pay for things which saves time.
Yeah.
But it would be very unlike like the first thing which you need to think about, especially in a developer product, is like, are developers willing to invest their time using your product, right? That's sort of the first indicator, because developers don't invest time if they find it useful. Like they are very cut and dry. and we have been developers ourselves. We like sort of a sense that, hey, like, does it sound like a tool which I will use or which I'll not use, right? So a very good indicator for DevTools product is like, hey, like, are developers spending time using our product? And that is sort of an early indicator that what is the value you're creating, and then that's like a question like how much you can capture, right? So to capture value, you first need to create value, right? And the first sort of indication that you are able to create value is that are developers spending time here? Because one, developer's time is costly. Uh, like even in India, salaries are like quite high now. So developers' times are costly. Companies will pay for saving developers' time. So I think a very easy way to understand, especially, and this all applies just for like primarily for developer products, is that, hey,
Yeah.
like, are developers using your product? And if they're using your product, they will give you feedback. It's like they are very vocal. Either they will share it in Reddit,
Maybe,
or
maybe too much feedback.
maybe too yes, yes, maybe too much. because because if you think about it, developers know how these products are built. Like, they
Yeah,
are not like end consumers, right? So
correct,
they can figure out that, hey, like, why are you not doing it like this? It may be better. And okay, yeah, that's fair. Like, they
correct.
have much more context on giving you feedback.
Correct. No, I think this is a great insight for all kind of US India DevTool founders out there. I think going in for how much time your developers are spending, I think, and I think retention in general and the intensity of usage are, I think, first very good kind of leading signals in terms of are you sitting and are you on some kind of intense enough problem statement and pain point